Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode.
All right, skipping right past Chapter 5 and on to Chapter 6. It
None
talks
of us
about...
are in the business of teaching people how to play tennis.
I'm not, no. Although I
I
did
shouldn't
take...
even be reading the book on the steps how to do it.
I took a coaching tennis class in college.
Coaching tennis?
Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
It fit my
That's what you mean.
schedule.
And that's also
and it was
makes
major.
Like it wasn't like a PE class where you were just taking tennis. You were coaching tennis, fit your major better.
But it was very difficult. It was one of the hardest classes I took because your grade was based on performance. Outdoor tennis in January, February,
Ugh.
March, not easy. So I think I got a B plus in that, and I was like thrilled to get a B plus in it.
I feel like a lot of people think that like, oh, well, you played volleyball. It's like tennis swings the same. I'm like, have you watched the two sports?
Yeah, it wasn't.
No.
Well, I didn't play volleyball either, but
But like also handball versus racquetball coordination is not the same.
I'll take your word for it.
When your flow state is hand to ball, tennis ain't working. You know?
I believe you. So Chapter 6 has to do with the changing of habits, which he literally says it is in the process of changing habits that most players experience the greatest difficulty. And I am right with him on that. He talks about like the groove theory of performance, the kind of the more you do it one way, the more that groove sinks in, deepens, or whatever. And we get stuck kind of trying to unlearn that. And his advice is just start new habits.
Just do it. Just do something else.
But it's impossible to change a habit when we're too busy like kicking our own rear end for having a bad habit in the first place.
The second you say like, well, I need to change that habit because I've been doing it bad or wrong. Yep. Like again, we just talked about detaching judgment from things. Like if you think you're going to create a new habit, kicking yourself for the one that you had before, well, you're on the road to correcting it. So it's not.
Well, we're really quick to say that's a bad swing.
Yeah.
I did that all wrong. And instead of giving our body credit for being able to do miraculous things and using that
Anything
as a foundation for moving forward. And so if we're going to spend a lot of time and effort trying to like grind out a different path, so to speak, or unlearn or undo a groove, that's going to be very frustrating and take a long time, as opposed to just kind of like, let's just cut that loose and kind of see this for the first time. Beginner's mind, it was all zen there. Yep. But that's how we learn. If we have a beginner's mind, if we don't, we don't learn. And so I think that's wasting time fighting old habits when we can just, all right, I'm going to just do this
Start a new one
differently. That's freeing, and it then lets us start this process. And first step in the process is observing, as is constantly said throughout this book, being able to just observe without applying judgment and lots of emotion and harsh viewpoints and self-talk statements. That's key. And again, I think first seeing other people kind of do things, that doesn't mean like you're going to perfectly mimic that, but it does give you a blueprint for how to do something well. So, but like everybody will have their own kind of maybe slightly different natural arm swing or whatever it is. There's still like biomechanical foundations we want to have in place that can be sound, but if you kind of slide into your natural slot, you'll be fine. Now, observing that in others and then being able to observe that in yourself, that's how you become aware of what you're doing. You feel what you're doing. And that's step one in being able to change a habit or start a new habit, is being aware of how you're doing it in the first place. And that starts with observing. There's no way around it.
You're talking about natural, like arm swing, for example. Or let's talk about jump shot instead, which shouldn't be more in my wheelhouse than an arm swing, but I think it's more broadly known. What's your thought though on like going into your natural state? Some people have a naturally unsound
It's true.
shot though. So like, what's
Well, I remember I just watched a little video on Larry Bird, who was a great shooter, um, and he tended to shoot
yep,
from his side. Um, and often we'll teach a kid here, but this is how he
yeah,
shot.
and it worked.
Lots of them winning.
Right.
And I think you did see people start to mimic his jump shot after a while. They saw how he did it. I remember, blast from the past, Jamal Wilkes played for the Lakers. He had kind of a funky
Weird
motion,
yeah.
but he was a really good shooter.
Yeah.
Magic Johnson had a different jump shot than Stephen Curry. So I think finding your own kind of rhythm and natural shot in that regard is, foundational,
Yeah.
really. And that's, I think ultimately, like, they're all finishing pretty similarly though
Yeah.
And there are lots of similarities in terms of rhythm and how smooth it is, and you don't see anything too weird,
Yeah.
in that regard. But there are individual like quirks or however you want to describe that, and that goes for pretty much anything. So I think once we observe, then we kind of find our natural place, and then it's all about programming, watching someone who whatever he using a powerful serve, and then we kind of see what they do. Then we start trying to see ourselves doing that, feeling ourselves doing that, and literally programming like a vision of it, where we try to make the movie in our head as detailed as possible, hearing the sound of the racket hitting the ball, hitting the sound of the ball hitting the court. The more vivid those images are, those reels in our head, the more that kind of soaks into our motor learning patterns.
Well, we've got a million negative reels and images in our head of how things could go bad.
Well, sure.
And it just shows how much those can impact our thoughts and our actions and then the outcomes. And if we can trust that if both of the bad ones can produce bad outcomes, well, then we can create those pathways for the good ones to help us produce better outcomes.
I mean, that goes back to stuff we've talked about before, being aware of our thoughts. And if we're not, then we're mindlessly attacking ourselves, criticizing ourselves, guaranteeing we're not going to learn at any kind of rate that we would prefer. And we may never learn to the point where we really are approaching a peak performance state. So once we kind of are able to kind of observe and adapt and program this, then it is about letting it happen, where the job of self one then is really about just kind of observing, and self two is kind of being trusted to kick in and do its job and perform. And then self one just kind of gathers information.
I think visualizing and taking away the judgment helps you to focus on what you want it to be, instead of trying to force, like, well, it can't be this. I need to go from A to B, or A to Z in some cases. And when you can just observe it and not have the judgment on it, which I feel like we've been talking about judgment all day long, but that's the whole point of this, I suppose. It allows you to really focus on what the goal is, rather than the goal is to not do this. The goal is for this new habit to look this way. And so separating the I shouldn't be doing this, or I can't do this anymore, to here's the focus on how I want it to be going forward.
Well,
I think it's a little more positive spin on.
But you trust your body to learn. And we all have, like, whatever we've used the example he did too, of like learning to walk. It required no manual.
Sure.
It required no verbal instruction whatsoever. All it was observing, programming, in this case, pretty unconsciously, and then just
trying, failing, right.
So that is a natural learning pattern. That's how we learn physical things. And anything applied in the process apart from that is slowing the learning process down and impeding performance. And that, I know for me as a coach I didn't have like a nervous breakdown when I realized I am getting in the way.
Yeah.
I was constantly trying to learn how to be better so that I could help my players be better. And if that meant I shut up or rephrased everything that came out of my mouth, that's what I was going to do. So it was not a, I don't know, I didn't need to go to therapy or anything. I just wanted to be better. And so, yeah, I do things differently. I can't, I can't remember if I ever told this story in here. If I did edit it out, but I was giving a lesson to a volleyball player a couple of years ago in the summer as an outside hitter. And the whole lesson was me doing it this way. And I explained to him first what was up. And I could tell it was strange for him.
Yeah.
And after about the fifth lesson, everything just kind of clicked for him. And he was murdering balls and super happy. And at the end of that lesson, he said to me, after the first lesson, I thought you were kind of a quack.
You told me this. I don't know if you shared it on here, but
but now, if you told me to quack, I'd start quacking.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that. His name was Dom Colton. And that was meaningful to me because I knew that by me getting out of his way, I just kind of, I'll create an environment that facilitated him being able to learn this and do it. And it was really fun to watch and very memorable because he was really open to it. And he gets a lot of credit for being able to do that. Not everybody is so quick to be able to kind of reframe how they're approaching it.
Well, I think reframing, redirecting the way that we think about things. I haven't read a parenting book in a long time, but my oldest was first born. Like redirecting your child rather than telling them like no or don't do that was the suggested way of disciplining or redirecting. And I get the concept from a parenting perspective, but I do 100% buy into redirecting when it comes to this stuff, when it comes to talking to yourself. I mean, aside separate from disciplining kids or teaching them the right from wrong, but redirecting the way that either where you put your focus, where you put your efforts, redirecting it just into the general category of I'm going to do it differently now. I'm going to watch these people who do it well. I'm going to study them and not necessarily apply step by step by step by step to me, but notice what it is that they do well. And not just like, I think it's easy to watch people who, for example, can crush a serve. Like a topspin serve was never for me. So in my mind, I would see people do it and be like, well, it just comes so naturally to her. And some people, I think it does. But I think if you watch someone who you're trying to learn from because they do it well with the attached thought of like, oh, well, it just comes easy for her, that's not going to help you study them the way that you should study them appropriately to be able to then get your body to do it.
You're stuck comparing.
You're stuck in this comparison state of like, well, look how easy it is for her to do this. And that to me was where, honestly, probably I got stuck with things. It was like I had friends who could naturally topspin and I could naturally float a serve, and trying to say like, oh, well, it just comes easy. The second you add that in there, like that's the judgment, that's the comparison that is going to derail you completely from being able to study them appropriately and achieve.
Plus, even
directing that way.
If you're talking about like a jump float serve, even then we want to make it more and more effective.
Yeah.
So it's goes over the net, closer to the net, deeper, no spin, or I've seen plenty of topspin jump serves that are easy as pie to pass. But if someone's got like a cannon for an arm, then that's a game changer.
Yep.
But he wraps up this chapter like explaining, and he compares like traditional way of learning versus inner game of learning. I'm not going to we beat the traditional way of learning to death, but I just he reiterates all these words like step 1, observe non-judgmentally your existing behavior, and ask yourself to change programming with image and feel. That's step 2. Step 3, let it happen. Don't force it to happen. Don't try harder. Just let it go. And then last, it's a non-judgmental, calm observation of the results, leading to continuing observation of the process until the behavior is automatic. And that's where you just kind of keep recycling this process. Yeah. But nowhere does it say, yell things at yourself. And look, there are plenty of hyper successful performers who, like, Novak Djokovic is a good example because he talks about this. Like, there may be like a time, like if I hit one out, I may be super angry and I yell a
Yeah.
bad word, but guess what? He doesn't drag that into the next
It's the
play.
next one.
And that by the time the next
Release it, move on.
play, yes,
Yeah.
he's back in this non-judgmental. And if he's not, he's in trouble.
Right.
And being able to cut that stuff loose in a performance situation is pretty important. And I think the more we practice being able to calmly observe, gather information, keep moving forward, keep seeing it, feeling it, our ability to observe improves, our awareness improves, our feel improves, and until we're making great progress in terms of how we want to perform, whatever it is.
Read that last step again. Or if it was the last one, but the most recent one.
Yeah. The non judgmental, calm observation of the results that leads to continuing observation of the process until behavior is in like automatic.
Okay, so for you and me who have functioning brains, and how do you break that down to a kid? Like how do you translate that message to a kid effectively to where you and I can read that and like take a couple seconds, think about it, and be like, okay, yes, I understand what this is saying. But when you're trying to either coach someone or you are young and you're listening to this and that they're like, what did they just say?
Right.
Like, what's the translation there?
I would probably make that into little bite-sized morsels. 1, let's stop judging ourselves. 2, let's stay calm. And being able to control our thoughts and emotions, that's part of this. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to stay calm if you can't do that. You're going
You
to
can't be
flip
calm in
out.
your actions if you're sitting there stressed about
Right.
doing it.
So practicing being calm is important. That's why, I mean, all these guys, Djokovic is one, he definitely meditates, and he practices being aware of his thoughts so that he can harness them, keep himself between the rails, and make sure that he's not out of control. And that, you don't have to be like the world's #1 tennis player to do that. This stuff works. So many people think it's too exotic to bother with, but that's
Well, I mean, even just
a mistake.
and I mean, before you and I started doing this, I wasn't studying this regularly. And I mentioned this before, but I have to do a fair amount of like public speaking for my job. Podcast aside, all this doesn't feel very public anymore. So I guess it's becoming more public. And I used to just like I would feel calm going into it, and the second it was my turn to go up, heart racing, just sweating. And I thought I wasn't nervous. I thought like, okay, I feel pretty good today. Like I feel good with the content. And I finally realized that I wasn't so much worried that like the content I was delivering wasn't going to go well. I was worried about stumbling over my words or stuttering or sneezing, like whatever it was. And the reality is, in that setting when it's public speaking, if I'm in a room of 200 people and I'm there talking about financial matters, which is the content of my speech, not how well does she never stutter or have to look at her notes, maybe 1% of people in that room are the type of person that's going to be like, well, her content was good, but her delivery was just, like she never stumbled once. Most people are there because they want the content and they value the message I deliver. Same thing in a performance outcome. Most people sitting in the stands don't know what a perfect volleyball arm swing looks like. They just see like, oh, that girl gets a kill every time. So removing that, like, yes, ideally you're not worried about what anyone thinks, at all. But if it's a matter of step 1 of shifting, my goal here is to perform in my most comfortable state and not that everyone here is analyzing if I do it just the right way. I think that can immediately relieve, for me at least, was able to help relieve some stress of
and
the stumbles or the missteps.
No one is expecting some
perfection.
Right.
But you think that, I think we think that they are.
That's a mistake.
Correct.
That they would be
100%.
dwelling on that.
100%.
And that's where, in a public speaking scenario, it's always, I think, advisable to remind yourself, I'm here to help them.
Yeah.
They are here because they are looking for help, looking for ways to
And
be better.
the second I shifted that, like, I get zero nerves anymore.
There you go.
Like the second I realized, and admittedly, it took a couple of times of people being like, I had no idea, that was so helpful. But it gave me the confidence that yes, when I talk, like whether or not, and now I know whether or not someone comes up to me and tells me that was amazingly helpful, I never heard that before, or whatever it is, I know that it's the same message I delivered that one time that someone gave me the high five kind of feeling, and I'm just going to keep doing that because I know that's what these people are here for.
Well, and no one is watching expecting a perfect performance. Like even in the last Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts played really well, MVP. I think there were 4 or 5
Yeah,
passes that were
perfect.
incomplete.
Sure.
Like, that's the nature.
But we put the
of
pressure on ourselves that we think.
Sure.
Like I never watch any other public speaker, and I'm like, they better not stumble over their words. And frankly,
Right.
when they do, if they laugh about it, I laugh with them because it's like, oh, they're human up there. But the pressure we put on ourselves is so unrealistic compared to what we expect of others.
I know. I was texting with a friend of mine this morning who was talking to me about me helping one of her players, and I remember texting her back, and I said, "Isn't it interesting how, on one level, a player will lack confidence and think they're not very good, and on the other hand, they'll expect themselves to play mistake free."
Right.
It's like, which is it?
Can't
You know,
be.
and
You shouldn't be either, but you can't be both.
right, and the human factor guarantees we're going to make mistakes. Never mind in a competitive setting where it's not just us on a putting green by ourselves.
Yeah.
We're competing against other people, other teams. There's all kinds of variables.
Yeah.
It's just going to guarantee that we're going to have, glitches. And much of what we find inspiring about athletics is people, teams who are able to overcome whatever.
100%. Yep.
I think of the Super Bowl with the Patriots where they're down 28-3 at one point in the second half, and they come back and win the game. And sure, you can say, well, they had a rough go of it. They were getting down 28-3, but they didn't stay there.
Yeah.
And
or a gymnast who slips off the beam for a sec but catches herself, and you're like, oh my God, did you see how strong she was to save herself from that fall? Like, you don't say like, oh my God, she fell. You're like, did you see her save herself from that? Or an ice skater's foot slips, but they landed anyway. Like, we don't expect those people and I'm thinking gymnasts, like Olympic type gymnasts and Olympic ice skaters are what I'm picturing in my mind. You tend to be impressed by their recovery of their step.
One of the videos I always show is this runner, the University of Minnesota,
Oh,
and at one point in the race, she trips.
Yeah.
She's tripped, down she goes. Well, if she spends a second, oh, this isn't fair. I can't believe somebody tripped me.
I'll never make it.
She gets up immediately and starts running as fast as possible. She winds up winning the race.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen by accident. I mean, she trained
to be ready for that,
to be able to get back up and keep coming. But if that's what we train always, that's a much more powerful thing because, adversity is coming.
Yeah, I would way rather be able to know I have the power to overcome than the power to be perfect.
Yeah, well, and
because it's not
realistic. There is no, it's just not happening. So that's where, if we can tie identity to something like, I'm a fighter, I get up every time, I work my ass off, whatever.
I can overcome it,
Then those are the things, those are the stories that are moving, those are the things that inspire us, as opposed to some sense of perfection that's unrelatable. No one is like that. I mean, if you take the greatest athletes in any sport, Michael Jordan, what's his quote? I missed 9,000 shots or whatever. Like, he didn't make every shot. Babe Ruth didn't hit a home run every time. Tom Brady didn't win every game. It just, I don't know. That's not, to quote the great Bob Rotella, this is not a lab experiment. And being able to experience this and love all of it is how this works. And that means love the struggle, love the work that you have to put in. Because if you see that as they're all steps towards me improving and getting to the point where I'm performing as well as I can, that's awesome. Not common, but it's possible. Like, every one of us, if we just keep approaching this in a way that is psychologically healthy, then who knows what we can do. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.